Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where it's an especially hot and humid morning. Despite the fact that it's only 6:45 a.m. I'm up and out and about early because I'm still suffering from the effects of jet lag. We just returned from our American vacation and we spent the last 2 weeks in New York City. We had a really wonderful time. We enjoyed the normal sightseeing spots and activities. We visited the museums. We went shopping on Fifth Avenue. We ate at the restaurants. We walked around Central Park and did quite a few other things. We had a great time, but after almost 2 weeks there, I'm quite happy to be back. And one of the reasons I'm happy to be back is I think I spent way too much money in New York. And I wasn't planning on spending too much money, but the cost of living there and the cost of food and things have become so high that I think it's pretty much impossible to spend any time there without spending a lot of money. I'm quite shocked at how expensive New York has become. And you might say, well, hey dummy, everyone knows New York City is expensive, but you have to remember that I live in Tokyo, which for the last 60 years has been regarded as the most expensive city on earth. The Ginza district here in Tokyo, which is less than a square mile in size, at one time had a higher land value than the entire lower United States, the lower 48 states combined. And that means that the Ginza district had a higher value than New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and every other big city, and everywhere else combined. So if someone from Tokyo complains about the cost of living in your city, you can probably trust that the cost of living in your city is a little bit high. For those of you living in New York who are I guess facing the difficulty of a high cost of living and want to live in a big city, you might consider coming here to Tokyo, where you can enjoy living in a big city but without the dirt and without the crime and with a much lower cost of living. But anyway, now that I've got that off of my chest, let's go ahead and get started with the subject of today's video. And in today's video I'm going to be comparing what are arguably the two best fixed lens rangefinder cameras of the late 60s and early 70s. I'm going to be comparing the Canonet QL17 to the Olympus 35 SP. Now, what makes these cameras the best fixed lens rangefinder cameras of their era is that they were designed for serious use. These were not consumer cameras, though they weren't highly expensive cameras. They were very high quality, and they featured one thing which differentiated them from the consumer cameras, which were more designed for the mass market. And that was that these cameras feature fully mechanical operation. That means though these cameras do use batteries, the battery is used only to power the light meter. The main functioning of the camera is fully mechanical, which allows you to use the camera if the batteries go dead or you find yourself in a place where you simply can't find batteries. And 50 years ago that was more the case than it is today. Today batteries are a bit easier to find than they were at that period, but even today a lot of people who have gone to places using digital cameras, so if they've gone to, say, Everest or the rainforest or places like that, they find that the climate there is not very healthy for batteries or electronics, and failures are not a rare thing. And a sensible person would carry a fully mechanical backup camera, which can at least allow them to take pictures when their I guess full-time kit is incapable. And cameras like these are very well suited for those situations, besides the fact that they're well suited for just general photographic use. And the fact that they are well made is obvious when you consider that even today, still works fine, after more than 50 years of life. I wonder how many digital cameras will still be working well, 30, 40, 50 years from now. But at least these cameras are a tried and true design, and they're just great. I'll just let it go at that. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to be comparing the features, controls, and functions of these cameras. They share a lot of similarities, but they also share some things which are different, and I'll go ahead and cover that in this. And one thing that you might want to pay attention to in this video is I'm going to be covering some of the flaws which these cameras have. And these flaws you should keep a sharp eye out for if you are shopping for one of these cameras. These cameras are generally good, reliable, very capable picture takers, but they do feature weaknesses and things which you have to keep an eye open for. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the more common of the cameras, and that is the Canonet QL17. This particular one is not a G3 model. This is what is called a new Canonet. This camera is identical to the G3. The only difference between this camera and the G3 is that it doesn't say G3 on it. It features the same shutter, same lens, same hot shoe for the flash, same everything. Another thing which is lacking is a battery check lamp. Not that that matters, because the battery check lamps very seldom work on the G3 anyway. It's basically the same camera. So let's go ahead and take a look at the top here. We have the film rewind knob. We have a hot shoe for the flash. This flash features an extra pin which allows it to be used automatically with the Canon Light D flash, which was made for these cameras. We have the film counter dial here. We have the shutter charging and film winding lever, and we have the shutter release lever, which accepts a standard cable release. On the back of the camera, we have the viewfinder eyepiece. This camera features a large and bright viewfinder with parallax correction, which is a wonderful feature. And here's the battery check switch. When you press on this button, if you look through the viewfinder, the meter needle will move to the check position. There's a mark on there, and if it moves that position, it means the battery is properly charged. Here we have a small cap which covers the vertical adjustment for the rangefinder. You can loosen this by putting a piece of rubber against it and pressing hard and turning it leftwards. And underneath you'll see the rangefinder adjustment screw. And here we have an indicator showing that the shutter is charged or not charged. A really cool feature. The bottom of the camera, we see get that tape off of there, the battery chamber. We see the tripod socket, which accepts a standard 1/4 inch tripod. And we have the release button, which you press to rewind the film. This camera was originally designed to use the MR9 battery. You can use a PX625 battery in it and it will work fine. We have the focusing ring here on the bottom here, which has a convenient tab to aid in focusing. We have a focusing scale here, which is arranged in meters and feet. We have the aperture ring, which features a range of apertures on one side, written in black letters. We have an A setting, and then we have some guide number settings here for using a flash. Keep in mind when you are operating the Canonet QL17 that the manual shutter will only work if you are using the black aperture numbers. If you set it to A and the camera doesn't have a battery in it or the light meter isn't working, the shutter will not fire. Also, if you have it set in the A and the light meter is working and the battery is good, if you have the shutter speed set outside the acceptable range for good exposure, the shutter will not work. Excuse me, humidity is getting to me here. In front of that we have a indicator for the film speed, and you set the film speed by turning this dial here. And as you turn it, you'll see the film speed settings change here. And then front here we have the shutter speed range. We have 1/4 of a second up to 1/500th of a second. To select the bulb setting, you have to push the lock button here, and that will allow you to go to the bulb setting. The camera features a 40mm f1.7 lens. The 40mm lens was quite popular. This focal length was used by a variety of manufacturers around that time, and this was supposed to give you kind of a middle ground between the wide angle 35 and the standard 50mm lens. These were popular not only in these fixed lens rangefinder cameras, but they were also popular in a number of SLR cameras. This camera features what is known as the quick loading system. So when you open the back, this catch here, this pressure plate opens up, and what you do is you simply put in the film and lay the leader across the back, and as you push this down, it will grab the film and force it onto the take-up spool, and then you simply wind the camera until the number 1 shows up in the counter window and the camera is ready to use. So the next thing I want to talk about is things to look out for in this camera. The biggest problem which the Canonet QL17 suffers from is issues with the glass used in the manufacture of the lens. The QL17, since it featured an f1.7 lens, required a special formula for the glass to reduce chromatic aberration. And what that means is the faster the lens gets, the more difficult it is to focus all the colors on the same plane. And if you don't use a special glass for this, you get fringing around, fringing in the image. It's usually red fringing you can see in color film. It's not noticeable so much in black and white, but it is an issue. And the problem with this glass is that it's not as durable or clear as the glass used in, say, the QL19 or the QL28, which were the less expensive versions of this camera. One thing I always look for when I'm buying one of these cameras is to see that it has a filter on it, because if it has a filter on it, if you're buying it on eBay or someplace like that, an old one which you're going to fix up, if it has a filter on it, for some reason it's less likely to have issues with the lens, especially in the front lens. The front lens of these cameras, the coating is kind of soft and it's easily scratched if you are cleaning it. And the way the glass is designed, the formula of the glass, it tends to get sometimes a gray or milky kind of opaqueness around the edge of the glass on the inside element, and unfortunately this can't be cleaned out. So that's kind of a fatal flaw to the lens, and it does affect the performance of the lens. Another thing to look for is the back lens. So the rear lens in these cameras, the issue they have is that the light seals deteriorate, and as you can see, these are kind of dusty and falling apart. And residue from the light seals tends to get on the rear element of the lens, and the chemicals used in the foam rubber kind of etch into the lens, and when you try to clean it off, it leaves marks and things like that. And also these lenses are sometimes prone to fungus. So you have to check the front and rear lenses. Cleaning the inside of the lenses is quite easy. You can remove the rear lens element. That's the easiest way to do it, to clean any haze which is between them. Luckily, there's not an issue for the internal coatings. It's just mainly the outside of the front and rear lens. Mechanically, these cameras are very reliable. The only issue which I sometimes see is that the aperture sometimes sticks in these cameras. So if I set the camera to B here, if I stop down the camera, you should see that the aperture is stopped down there. And as I open the aperture to the camera, it doesn't move, but when I charge the shutter, you can see it opens. So sometimes the aperture sticks, and when you open the aperture and you charge the shutter, the aperture blades don't open, and they have to be cleaned. And that can be done by removing the front or rear elements of the lens and cleaning the aperture blades with a little bit of solvent on the end of a cotton swab. Another issue to look out for is corrosion in the battery compartment, which can cause the lead to disconnect, which can cause the shutter to not operate. And, the meter to not operate. The shutter will probably still work fine. And the last issue these have is sometimes the slow speeds don't work. And what I do to address the slow speed issue is I find that if I put a few drops of a solvent either on the release button here or down the self-timer lever, just a drop or two, not a lot, it will seep into the slow speed escapement, and usually the slow speeds will start working. Another issue is sometimes the self-timer sticks, and this is an issue with all cameras of this era with leaf shutters, and that's why I recommend, if you can avoid it, not to use the self-timer in these cameras. But otherwise, this is a really wonderful camera. When you're shopping for one, make sure that it has a clean lens, make sure the slow speed works, make sure the battery chamber is clean, and make sure that the self-timer works. And when you get it, avoid using the self-timer. One thing to remember is that, if you get the camera, remember that if it's in the A or the guide number settings and you don't have a battery in it, the shutter will not work. That doesn't mean the camera's bad, it just means you have to move it over one setting. I buy a lot of these cameras here in Japan, and I always, I can always find a good deal on because the seller says, oh, the shutter doesn't work. And whenever I look at the cameras, photos of the camera, it's usually set to the A, and that's why it doesn't work. Another thing to keep in mind about these cameras is another issue which I have, I should have mentioned this before, another thing to look out for, the last thing, is haze in the beam splitting mirror. When I first started selling these cameras 15 or 16 years ago, it wasn't a common issue, but after 15 or 16 years, these cameras are getting older and older, and I noticed that over time that the hazing issue is more common. Fortunately, it's kind of easy to replace the beam splitting mirror in these, and I plan to make a video showing how to make and cut a mirror to fit in a rangefinder or other camera using just common tools. It's not the most pretty process, but it's cheap, it's simple, and it will bring your rangefinder back to life in old cameras. Alright, moving over to the next one, we have the Olympus 35 SP, and you can see it also has a very clean design on the top. The SP does not have the automatic flash support like the Canonet QL17, but it does have a hot shoe, and you can use any modern flash with this camera. It will work fine. We have the film rewind knob here. We have the shutter release button here, which accepts a standard cable release. We have the film counter window, and we have the film winding and shutter charging lever here. Odd thing is the tip on this this camera, this tip here is the same as which comes on the Olympus OM series. And also on the M1 series. And I come across some of these cameras which are broken, and I used to restore the old Olympus M1s, and the tip is always deteriorated or rotted out on it. And I find that I can simply get the parts from an old Olympus SP, and I can use the tip here on an OM camera, no issues. The back of the camera here, we have a viewfinder window, and the viewfinder window has bright lines just like on the Canonet QL17, but the Olympus SP does not have parallax correction, but it does have parallax marks inside, correction marks, so you can use these marks when you're using the close focus. Not that many people use rangefinder cameras for close focus, but you have that option here. And on the back here you have the spot meter function. And the spot meter is something which Olympus came out with this version of the camera, which later found its way onto their SLR cameras, especially the high-end models. And the spot meter function is a really wonderful idea, and it's one of the things which makes this camera so great. And what happens is when you push the button on the back here, in the center of the viewfinder, the frame lines, it will focus the light meter on the center, which allows you to take exposures off of light or dark areas, which allow you to get a more accurate exposure. And this is really handy if you're shooting in situations where you have sun and shade, or you're shooting on the ski slopes or something like that, and you want the black colors to look black and the white to look white, or you want people to be visible if they're standing under a tree on a sunny day. And that's one thing this camera features that the Canonet QL17 does not. Moving to the bottom of the camera, this camera uses the same battery which the Canonet QL17 uses. It features the same 1/4-inch tripod socket and the same kind of button for releasing the film winding mechanism. On the front here we have the basic same focusing system with a focusing tab on the bottom. We have a focusing scale which is arranged in meters and feet, so far the same as the other camera. We have the same style aperture ring with an automatic setting and the settings for the aperture. This camera features a 42mm f1.7 rather than the 40mm f1.7. The difference is so small that you would never notice it. And of course in the front here we have a full range of shutter speeds. Unlike the Canonet, the shutter on the Olympus goes all the way down to 1 second, so you get a couple of extra stops for longer exposures. Not that most people will take advantage of that feature, but this camera does have it. One thing about the Olympus 35 SP is that the light meter always works. So you can use the light meter regardless where the camera is set, and you can use it in manual modes as well as the automatic mode. A really cool thing about the automatic mode here on the Olympus SP versus the Canonet is it's a program mode, which is really an amazing feature for a manual focus camera. The Canonet QL17 features what is called a shutter priority mode, which when you set the shutter and you depress the shutter button when it's in the automatic mode, the camera will select the best aperture for the available light. And so it's something which Canon specialized in their rangefinder and SLR cameras at that period, whereas other makers tended to go with the aperture priority system. So you would set the aperture and then the camera would set the best shutter speed. The benefit of the shutter priority system is that you can set it for the minimum speed you want, say 1/60th of a second, And if the speed is below that, the shutter won't work, so you'll have to open up the aperture a little bit, and you won't have to worry about the exposure being so long that you suffer from camera blur. The blur is a big issue with the aperture priority cameras. In the case of the SP, the program mode sets the aperture and the shutter speed. So when you set it in the automatic mode, you can use the spot meter or the regular meter and simply lock your exposure by pushing the button halfway and then turning it to your subject and then pushing it all the way and taking a photograph. This is a really wonderful feature and allows you to get the most out of the light meter function in the camera. Now, issues with the Olympus 35 SP, these are very similar to issues which we have on the Canonet QL17, and this camera here actually suffers from a few of these problems. One issue is of course haze on the front lens and scratches. It's less common on the Olympus 35 SP than on the Canon. The quality of the glass in this camera is very, very high, and it's not common for the camera to get haze in the glass, but it does happen from time to time. And it does happen on the rear element as well. The rear element on the SP and the 35 are pretty much the same. They suffer from the issue of dust from the rubber light seals getting on the coating and moisture getting in this dust and then etching into the coating of the lens. One thing about the SP, I find it to be a little bit easier to repair than the Canonet QL17. It's easier to remove the lens and get inside and do cleaning. The lens on this camera is what is called a G Zuiko lens, which is a 7-element lens, which is a more sophisticated lens than the Canonet design. And if I had to go by judging these cameras on the quality of the lens, I would probably give the nod to the Olympus. Whereas if I had to give a nod to the, I guess, overall operation and feel, I would probably go with the Canonet. When it comes to shooting with an accurate light meter or in difficult situations, there's no comparison. The Olympus 35 SP is by far the superior camera. Other issues which you sometimes have with these cameras are with the light meter itself. You may find that you put a battery in the camera and the light meter works, but the spot mode doesn't work. And that's a common issue. The light meter on this thing is very simple. It's just a light meter cell, 2 cells, which are just screwed in here with a simple switch and a couple of contacts going to the battery. It's about as simple as it gets. It's about as complicated as a 50s era flashlight. It's usually quite reliable, but they do sometimes fail. Replacing the light meter is almost comically easy. If you can find a donor camera, a broken or smashed one that the light meter works, all you need is a screwdriver and a soldering iron, and you can switch from, you can replace it quite easily. When you are taking the front lens element off to clean the camera, this faceplate is glued on. So what I do is put a few drops of paint thinner around to soften the glue, and then I carefully lift it up with an X-Acto knife or something like that to lift it loose. And it's made out of aluminum, so you have to be careful not to bend it. When you put it back in place, just make sure if it's distorted to try to get it really flat before you put it back on. The shutter in this camera is incredibly reliable. I've never had an issue with the Olympus 35 SP shutter sticking or having issue with the slow speeds. Olympus really did a good job when they designed this. Another issue with this camera is the focusing helicoid, which on this camera it's a little bit stiff and icky feeling, but it is working. Focusing helicoids on these cameras, including the QL17, can sometimes seize, and when that happens, these cameras, you can do like with other cameras, fixed lens rangefinder cameras, you could heat up the camera. You can put it in your car on a hot summer day, in the sun under the back window, or you can heat it up with a hair dryer, and when the camera gets too hot to touch, often you can get, it will melt the grease in the focusing helicoid, and you can get it to work again, and it will keep working. That's kind of a quirky kind of thing with these cameras. But if you can't get it to work that way, the camera's pretty much a brick, and you might be able to use it if it's stuck at infinity focus, but if it has a focusing helicoid issue, avoid buying the camera. The price of these cameras has gotten pretty high recently. People much more appreciate these than they did in the past. And the price for a good Olympus 35 SP would be $250 to $300. and maybe around the same price for a Canonet QL17. But then again, you know, the price depends mainly on the condition, and always make sure very carefully that the camera doesn't have any of the flaws which I described before you buy one. I sell these cameras quite frequently. I usually sell 1 or 2 QL17s per month and maybe a few of the Olympus 35 SPs per year. These have become quite expensive here in Japan, and I don't like to price my cameras very expensively when I'm exporting them to other countries, because people tend not to buy them. So I only buy them if I can price them very fairly. So yeah, it depends on what I can find here, and if I can find reasonable examples of the cameras in good condition, I list them for sale. I find I can get better deals and lower prices with the Ashika cameras, but a lot of people prefer these cameras. And this camera here I'm working on right now, this is a really good example with a clean lens and a good shutter and an operating light meter. I'll have this camera available for sale in a few days. The Olympus here has a few issues. I think I can get the focusing helicoid working. It's reasonably smooth, I think. With a little bit of work I can get it more smooth, so I should probably have this camera available next week or so when it's ready. So if you'd like to buy either of these cameras, please visit one of my online stores, and I should have both of them available shortly. I did add a lot of cameras to my Etsy store, and I'm adding a few more to my JapanVintageCamera.com store. So if you want to buy one of these cameras or something else, please check out my stores. I'll post links to my stores in the description below the video. And it's starting to get warmer here, and the sun is starting to shine on me, and it's making it kind of hard to make a good video here, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it short now. Maybe long, because this video is already more than 26 minutes. If you'd like to see more videos of camera comparisons, reviews, and things like that, please subscribe. If you like the video, please hit the like button. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.